So today in the church calendar, we hover between the season of Epiphany and the end of the Christmas story, as it were, and the beginning of Lent. And our gospel reading, the one we've just heard, takes us to the story of Jesus' transfiguration. High on the mountaintop, with only 3 chosen disciples as witnesses, Jesus' appearance is changed. The full glory of his divinity is fleetingly revealed in dazzling splendor, in the presence of Moses and Elijah, and much to the amazement of Peter, James, and John. The story provides us with a moment to stop and pause. And it's a moment of heightened emotion. You can't help, I think, but notice the edge of fear in the story, as well as awe and amazement. But a moment, too, in which we're invited to reflect on Jesus' identity and his mission, and especially to consider its ongoing significance for us today. This is my son, my chosen, God says in verse 35. Listen to him. So if we strain our ears today, what might it be that Jesus is saying to us here and now? What's interesting about God's dramatic and thrilling affirmation of Jesus' true identity is that in fact it's in stark contrast to much of the rest of the gospel accounts that we have about Jesus. With a few notable exceptions, the fact that he was the Messiah isn't always up front and centre. The Transfiguration is one of those rare moments where we can revel in the glory and the majesty and the divinity of Jesus. And yet even here, there are actually only very few witnesses who were then told in verse 36, keep silent and don't tell anyone about the things that they've seen. So this dichotomy between an intense experience of Jesus and his proclamation that the whole world may truly know who he is, on one hand, because that's what we are called to do, but then on the other hand, allowing his influence quietly to impact our lives in an ordinary way. This dichotomy is one of the many paradoxes, the many apparent contradictions of faith. And it's one that I hope that our confirmation candidates will continue to ponder in the years to come. For now, let me say that I can't help wondering if this paradox about Jesus' glory that cannot be fully expressed might have something to say to us at this time, when the church is struggling with a great deal of anxiety and uncertainty about declining numbers and an unclear future. Perhaps this dichotomy, perhaps today's gospel story is reminding us that when we come to know and experience Jesus for who he truly is in our lives, that doesn't mean that we've been given something to own, a possession that's become ours with the right to proclaim it and expect that others should experience it in exactly the same. Rather, we have to allow that experience to transform us and influence the way that we live our lives. And as we sensitively try to share the message, to allow others to experience it for themselves in ways that may be different to ours. For all its wonder, the message about Jesus can't in the end be nailed down and possessed by any of us. When my children were small, and I was at that stage of life where we seemed perpetually to live in chaos and noise, with our nerves frayed and often a feeling of failing as parents, I used to imagine bottling those rare moments of peaceful harmony, where everyone was calm and everything was peaceful. So that I could bring out that bottle whenever I wanted and sprinkle some of what was inside it all over us. But of course, I couldn't. All I could do, in fact, was enjoy those precious moments and hope that somehow they were infusing our family life, shaping our relationships for the longer term, and offering glimpses of what life could and might be like as maturity kicked in. We can't, on the back of our personal experiences of encounter with God through Jesus, claim spiritual status, or worse still, institutional power and influence, and then try to use these to persuade or convert others. Rather, this revelation about Jesus is a gift from God, disclosed and revealed often through brief glimpses in God's own time and in God's own way to each of us in different ways. In his enthusiasm, Peter suggests that he should build dwellings. He wants something concrete and tangible, proof of that particular moment having happened, a kind of bottling, if you like, to demonstrate that they really were there and to provide evidence so that others too might come to believe. And yet that's not how it was. It was all over in the twinkling of an eye, nothing to show for it other than the changed hearts of 3 disciples. No anxiety here at all about ensuring that as many people as possible should hear, so that they too could come to know and believe. Nonetheless, in this revelation, Jesus is transfigured, and the 3 disciples too are transformed. And though they're silent, this doesn't mean that there's no call on their lives at all. They are now individually and as a group drawn into the story of Jesus. And as such, they must follow faithfully in the path that he himself would tread first. And that path was paved with suffering, rejection, and death, as well as resurrection and new life. And that same way is inescapable for us who choose to follow Jesus. I want to be clear just for a moment and say that suffering and pain, which was Jesus' path and is often ours, are not in and of themselves redemptive. It wasn't Jesus' suffering per se that purged sin and evil, but rather it was his resistance against those who would destroy the things he stood for: love, justice, truth, compassion, and so on. These were, and in many ways still are, so threatening to the ways of the world that every effort is made to undermine them and to destroy the message of Jesus. But he responded not by dominating or defeating or subjugating, but with the power of love, which challenges, exposes, and ultimately transforms hatred, evil, and even death. When everything else is gone, love remains. And there's nothing passive about this kind of love, and as Christians we're called to emulate it, not simply by being nice and avoiding evil, or by bearing our personal burdens in silence. We're called rather to a vigorous pursuit of justice in every area of our life, refusing to play the world's power games, standing firm against domination, exploitation, greed and deception, things that threaten to destroy individuals, communities, and even our natural habitats, the things that we see in an attempt to destroy Ukraine even as we speak. The transfiguration of Jesus was literally and metaphorically a mountaintop experience. The kind of spiritual encounter that, if we're fortunate, we may have once or twice in our life, when longing and faith, heart and mind are united in such a way that God's presence is experienced in a deep and profoundly emotional way. But whether you're the kind of person who has emotional experiences of faith and dazzling lights and tingling sensations or not, you will most probably recognize the mixture of highs and lows in some shape or form. And these represent the ebb and flow of any faith journey. Jesus spoke both of death and resurrection, suffering and glory. We all have our own moments of pain and joy, of clarity and of doubt. And whatever your particular brand of mountaintop experience might be, you'll also have to descend from that place to the valley of your ordinary life, the mundane and the sometimes difficult. And of course, the point is that Jesus is present in those places and times too. Just as he accompanied the 3 disciples back down the side of the mountain, so he will accompany each of these candidates and all of us, calling us to live lives of love and compassion, free of anxiety, actively seeking justice for those who most need it, trusting that in the process we will be shaped and reshaped, continually transformed more and more into his likeness.